What would you do if the government came to your town and said everyone had to leave? We're going to take over and you might be able to come back in a few years. It's a tough sell. Eminent domain laws in the US says the government can relocate you and never let you come back, probably because your home is now a highway. Here in England in 1943, the village of Tyneham was given that notice just a short time before Christmas, and patriotic duty compelled them to go willingly and give up their village for the benefit of the war cause. A village that had been occupied for centuries, going back to the Iron Age, generations of family history for many of the residents. But they packed up their things and evacuated the area, assuming they'd be back once the Axis threat had diminished or disappeared. This area along the southern coast of England had been inhabited for thousands of years, and the village of Tyneham had been documented as far back as the Domesday Book written in 1086. Tyneham in ye old medieval English means homestead of young goats, which makes sense since life millennia ago and life during the evacuation in 1943 was vocationally the same. Pastoral, farming, raising animals, and fishing, though apparently this was the hub of goat rearing, goat husbandry, goat breeding. Thanks, thesaurus.com. The Domesday Book, commissioned by William the Conqueror, provides the earliest written evidence of the village's existence. The area was owned by his half-brother and subsequent family. They built the church and most of the main structures, owning the land until 1683, when Nathaniel Bond acquired the village and surrounding lands. And for the next 250 years, it was a simple English village. By the 1920s, it boasted a population of 225, a metropolis by rural English standards. The Bond family's ownership over centuries provided a stable and structured existence for the residents. St. Mary's Church, a central feature of Tyneham, has stood in the village since the 13th century. This medieval church served as the spiritual heart of the community for hundreds of years, witnessing countless baptisms, weddings, and funerals of Tyneham residents. By 1856, the village school was constructed. This small schoolhouse educated the children of Tyneham for nearly a century. This was a simple, average place, not really different from any other English town site of the time. By the 1920s, the village had maintained its traditional rural character, with most residents engaged in farming or fishing, carrying on the way of life that had sustained the community for generations. 1921 saw the first village telephone, here outside the post office. One of only 4 still in existence, it stands today only because the town is essentially frozen in time. In November of 1943, the lives of Tyneham's residents were irrevocably changed when they received notice to evacuate their homes by December 19th of that year. This sudden order came as part of the British war effort during World War II, disrupting centuries of continuous habitation within the village. The displacement of Tyneham's 225 villagers was deemed necessary to allow the British Army to use the area for D-Day invasion training. The village and its surrounding landscape were considered ideal for simulating the conditions troops would face on the beaches of Normandy. When the residents of Tyneham were ordered to leave, they were given assurances that they would be able to return after the war ended. This promise gave many hope that their displacement would be temporary, a bit of discomfort necessary to do their part to defeat fascism on the continent. The evacuation of Tyneham was completed on December 19, 1943. The last person to leave the village was Helen Beatrice Taylor, who poignantly left a note on the church door that read, "Please treat the church and houses with care. We have given up our homes, where many of us have lived for generations, to help win the war to keep men free. We will return one day, and thank you for treating the village kindly." And with that, the village was empty. The former residents went off to live with friends, family, and in new villages to do their best getting through the next few years while their town and fields were transformed. The War Department would recreate a mock French village to best simulate what the thousands of soldiers would experience in the upcoming invasion. A beach landing marched through the fields and woods and then approaching a small village with an unknown posture. Could it be full of friendly people or heavily defended by Germans? Is there Allied resistance fighters ready to help the soldiers, or is it plagued with starvation and illness? What do we do with prisoners, with ambushes, and the dead? How will we procure food and water and establish the logistics of supply routes? All of these questions and more are answered as realistically as possible through training that will most authentically reproduce the actual engagement. And Tyneham was going to do its part in answering them. Thousands of men would walk through these streets, being exposed firsthand to a reality they would experience in the near future. Throughout the remainder of World War II, Tyneham and the surrounding area were extensively used for military training, all-encompassing military training, with massive troop engagements, tank movements, artillery, and aerial bombing runs, all with live ammunition. And therein lies the rub. After the war's conclusion in 1945, contrary to the expectations of its former residents, the Army retained control of Tyneham Village and the 7,500 acres of land surrounding it. As it turns out, when the government and the Ministry of Defense turns your local area into a gunnery range and impact area, what comes with it is a little thing called UXO, or unexploded ordnance. Bombs and live warheads, sprinkled around your farmlands. It has a tendency of preventing rehabilitation. I don't know if that's actually a word, rehabilitation. Sounds like a word. The need for continued military training areas in the post-war period was cited as the reason for this decision. The justification was rooted in the growing Cold War, with an expectation that heavy artillery and armor would prevail as stockpiles between East and West grew aggressively. Tank training areas were needed, and this place was already essentially uninhabitable due to the aforementioned UXO. In 1948, the British government took the significant step of purchasing the entire Tyneham estate from the Bond family. This action effectively ended the family's centuries-long ownership of the village and solidified the military's long-term control of the area. Despite numerous protests and campaigns by former residents and their descendants, the people of Tyneham were never allowed to return permanently to their village. This broken promise became a source of lasting resentment and sadness for many of those who had been forced to leave their ancestral homes. Over the decades following the war, Tyneham gradually fell into a state of ruin. Without its inhabitants to maintain the buildings and land, nature began to reclaim the village. In 1975, in response to public interest and pressure, the Ministry of Defense began to allow limited public access to Tyneham. For a few days each year, curious visitors could explore the abandoned village, getting a glimpse into its frozen-in-time atmosphere. A decade later, in 1985, the military authorities further relaxed restrictions, allowing more regular public access to Tyneham. The village became open on most weekends and holidays, transforming it into an unusual tourist attraction and a site of historical interest. During the week, though, tanks still rumble through the area, as it remains an integral part of the Lulworth military range. The surrounding area continues to be used for Army training exercises, with the abandoned village sometimes serving as a backdrop for military scenarios. Recognizing the historical and cultural value of Tyneham, the Army has made efforts to preserve some of the remaining buildings. Particular attention has been paid to the conservation of St. Mary's Church and the old schoolhouse, two of the most overt reminders of the village's former life. In its current state, Tyneham exists as a ghost village, a community interrupted, frozen in time since the 1940s. In the north of Great Britain lies an island, St. Kilda, a remote outpost that has its own strange history and oddities. You can check out that video here. Thanks for watching, and as always, until next time, get lost.